Hey Nolan, thanks for joining.
Dan, good to see you, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I'm super happy that you jumped on here with me. One of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you was because what you really post about on Twitter is kind of like real actionable advice that I think a lot of business owners can implement. As you know, I'm sure you kind of look at who's on X or Twitter. And a lot of it's these business gurus and these business coaches who sometimes don't even have any experience running a business. So, when I saw you posting about the actual struggles that real business owners face and kind of how to overcome them, I was just impressed. One of the concepts, to be honest with you, that I think is really valuable and something I've been thinking about a lot lately is the cross-pollination between industries. So, landscaping to the online world, manufacturing to the auto world, just this cross-pollination of ideas and strategies and approaches to business in general, just super interesting. But I'd love to dive into your story a little bit if you're cool with that.
Yeah,
If you
no.
can, for
Let me
any,
know. I love where you started there. I just wanted to touch a couple of those things real
yeah.
quick. So again, thanks for having me. I we were I always joke about why I don't really know why I'm on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it these days. It's fun, and I started Twitter as any sane person does. My wife was in the hospital and it was 3 a.m. And so I decided to jump online. And so that was the impetus for me starting that and nicotine. Obviously, two very addictive substances. I don't know what I stopped nicotine. I'm still on Twitter. So if that tells you the power of how addicting it is. Um, but I've had a lot of fun doing it and I'm enjoying it. And I think hearing you talk about the value I bring is encouraging. So thank you on that. I do sincerely hope that I'm adding value to folks, and I'd love to share a little bit more of that. I also wanted to touch the idea of the cross-pollination thing. I read really widely, in large part because I can't focus on anything, but also because I do believe I generally agree with you on this cross-pollination thing. So I've taken points that I've actually applied like the next day from Andy Grove and Intel story, and I just cut grass, but the fact that that can still apply is very true. Completely agree. So I interrupted you a little bit there. Where you can guide us where you want to go, but I just thought you said some good stuff there that I wanted to touch on.
No, I'm super happy, and we can dive into it even more because I think it's um, probably one of the most important topics that I think is just completely overlooked is this cross-pollination of ideas and the sharing of industry standards or industry, strategies from one to the other. So yeah, I mean, we can totally dive into it. But before we do, I'd love for you to kind of give a bit of an intro to yourself, kind of what you're up to these days, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Totally. Okay, so the short version, born and raised Austin, Texas. My dad is a small business guy, and by small business, I mean he's grown some pretty sizable businesses. And so I grew up running around the office with him. My mom was a teacher, speech teacher. She's a saint. So that was my background. Didn't we realize it was strange that I got to overhear thousands of phone calls from my dad growing up, just driving around in the car. And that was formative for me later on in life. Again, I didn't realize that until I was mid to late 20s, how important that was to me, because that was just normal. So, like I said, my dad been very successful. When I graduated from high school, I went to Texas A&M. After Texas A&M, I decided that I kind of wanted to run away from my dad's shadow a little bit and joined the Marine Corps. Did 4 years as a combat engineer there. Married my high school sweetheart a couple days before commissioning in the Marine Corps. And then when it came time to get out, and I'm happy to talk more about that time, but when it time to get out, we decided to come back to Austin. We had just had our first kid, a daughter, at that point, and I had the opportunity to come and buy into a small residential landscaping business and did that. And I've been doing that for about 7 years now. We went from $1.6 million in revenue to about $6 million last in 2023. So that's about four times so far. And then we just bought a competitor about a month ago that should put us to be closer to eight plus this coming year. So we will see. We're in the middle of it right now. It's fun and difficult, as are most good and valuable things. But that kind of brings us to present, aside from the fact that I am still married to my high school sweetheart, and I now have 4 kids, and they're wonderful and a heck of a lot of work. And my wife's job is way harder than mine. Here we are.
Wow, good intro. Love it. Well, you touched on a lot there. Um, First of all, thank you for your service. Um, I work with a lot of veterans actually, just with the work that I do. And one of the things that a lot of them have in common is their mindset, their ability to take risk and kind of like stay cool under pressure. That's something I really admire. And that seems pretty consistent with at least the veterans that I know. That seems like a fairly consistent trait. Um, is that something that you think helps you in business?
Just the general ability to assess risk, or what part
Yeah, the
specifically?
ability to stay cool under pressure, risk. When you, for example, I saw that you took over your competitor recently.
Yep.
That's a risky move. You know, do you feel like your experience in the military helps you in business?
No, yeah, absolutely. So I think if I look back at what are the actual things that I've applied from Marine Corps land to business land, there's a handful because, and there's a bunch of things that don't apply, right? Like disassembly and reassembly of the M16 is not particularly useful in my day to day anymore.
At least you hope
The
not. Yeah.
conversion rates on TNT to C4 to all the other kinds of explosives, not very useful. Cool, but not very useful. What is very useful, to your point, is a assessment of tolerance of realignment of risk and stress. Those are similar, but not exactly the same thing. And so, like, it is a very common thing for something that is very stressful here for the average person to. And I'm not saying I don't get stressed out still. I still definitely get stressed out, but it is legitimate when I look at people pretty regularly and say, "Is anybody hurt? Did anybody die? We're going to be fine." Right? Because that was the standard. Like, obviously, we wanted things to execute really well, but it's just a much higher stakes in the Marine Corps. So now my understanding and appreciation for literally a lawnmower catching on fire in someone's yard, which happened last year, um, we had to go over there with fire extinguishers and put it out, which is kind of embarrassing. Um, it wasn't due to maintenance, by the way. Somebody left a leaf bag on top of the engine and then started driving it around and then didn't have the wherewithal to throw it off when it caught on fire. They just let it go and it just burned up the $10,000 lawnmower. Anyway, that was a frustration, but it was not that stressful because no one was actually hurt. Nobody's property was, there was some grass that was burned, but nobody's house was burning down. And so, yes, super valuable lessons, just realigning and my own personal understanding of what is stressful. Um, it also just really set a different standard from a work ethic perspective. You're just expected to be on 24/7, 365 with rare exceptions. So it didn't ever feel strange to me to just like stay on my phone and to be available all the time for whatever problems arise. And then there is some significant logistical and operational things you learn. You just get a lot of responsibility for people and equipment really early on in the military, which I really appreciated. I didn't realize how weird it was to be in charge of a convoy with 30 vehicles and 150 people and making sure that all those things were accounted for appropriately and getting your ass handed to you if you didn't do all of that perfectly. And you never did. So you often just kind of got appropriately chewed out and you work through the problem and get better the next day and you do it again. So yeah, very, very valuable experience. But I don't think I could have put my finger on it until 2 or 3 years later. One last point on that I think is really valuable. One thing you get used to, especially as an officer, is you're just required to evaluate and give feedback to people that are far senior to you from an experiential perspective. So I was 23. I was in charge of people that have been doing their job for 15 years, and I was supposed to tell them that they sucked at this one thing. Like that's super hard. And I had to go to Gunny Porter who was very good at his job most of the time, but was struggling in other areas, and give him feedback. And he had to look at me. I had to earn his respect in other ways, and also honor his level of experience. But I was in charge of him and had a responsibility to the organization to hold him to a certain standard. And that's just such a strange thing as a 23-year-old and 24-year-old. And it becomes normalized. It's just everyone does it. You're required to do it. You learn how to do it. You get reps. You suck at it. You get better at it. And so by the time I got here, I mean, the vast majority of our team is older than me. Not as many as they used to be because been here for 7 years, but most of our office team is older than me, and that's never been weird to me. It's never been scary because I just experienced it so young.
That's a great point, actually. Um, one of your tweets that you put out recently, I'd love to read it if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said a lot of my day is spent on interruptions, employee fires, and distractions. Often this is frustrating. I want to get my stuff done, but I need to remember that much of my job is enabling my team. These are interruptions, fires, and distractions that are actually the work. I need to deal with these things so they can keep moving. This, when I read that, first of all, this is something that I struggle with, and I think a lot of people do. So it was a great reminder to see that this is like something that's actually going on with other people too. But it also seems like a trait or a quality or a mindset more than anything else of someone who was in the military. Team first, uh, help other people's before you help yourself type of thing. Is that, do you think where that stems from, or are these just things that you've learned over time?
I think as you were asking the question, and since we had just talked about the military, my brain went there first. Um, and the example I would actually give is specifically in the role of the officer when you're in like a firefight, which I wasn't in any firefights, thankfully, but they just keep reminding you that your weapon is the radio as an officer, not the gun. Like your job is to move the people and assets into the right places so that they can succeed, not to get stuck behind a optic because then you get siloed on one specific bad guy or situation and you can't see the whole thing. And it's really counterintuitive. That's why they literally oftentimes don't even like they'll officers will end up with like a shotgun or a pistol, so they don't end up in a firefight with a rifle because they're supposed to be on the radio. And so that is drilled into you really heavy, really fast and young. Again, depending on where you're at in the Marine Corps and what role you hold. Um, I think, I mean, I was listening to somebody else on a podcast, and I should be able to quote him, but I can't clearly right now. But he was talking about how management is one of the only places where there's a job in which you don't actually personally accomplish anything, and how hard that is to get over. And your job is to get things done through other people. And that can be hard, especially from a masculine, tactile driven, um, biological perspective. Is like we want to see things completed by our hands. And so there's sometimes really difficult. I don't actually have that much problem with it. I like to see other people get things done. A business partner who's a box checker, who's amazing. I wouldn't be where I'm at without him. He just gets things done. He struggles with that. He wants to go get the things done and feels like he isn't accomplished in a day unless he's checked 10,000 boxes or legitimately 53 boxes, something insane. Um, and we have to have that conversation regularly because we've grown to the size right now where it's not good for him to be checking as many boxes. I need him to be guiding others to check boxes. So he wasn't military. He's excellent at it. He's getting better at it. So I'm not certain. I definitely think that I've been influenced from that military feel, but it's something that any manager or leader has to kind of come around to, and some are better than others, and it's a good reason why some people shouldn't be managers and leaders, and that's not a character flaw. It's just a personality driven and skill set driven ability to be able to move things via other people. Did I answer your question there? Sort of.
Absolutely. Yep. Now, if I pivot slightly to your
Okay, go for
current
it.
business, when you took it over, your first business, the first landscaping business that you acquired, you said you were doing what, 1.6 million a year it
Yep.
was at the time, and losing money, right?
Yeah. Yes. The short version answer of that is yes. It's never like when you're a small business, it's still kind of unclear, right? Like how much you paying the owner, um, whether or not that should be counted as making money or losing money. Pulling it. uh, Yes, the answer is they were losing money, but they were still surviving. If that makes sense, it wouldn't have survived for much longer had things not changed pretty drastically.
How did you crawl out of that situation? Because a lot of business owners, if they fall into that situation, a lot of times they'll just go bankrupt. But for someone to take over that situation, which is a, declining business, how do you right the ship? What were your, if you can think back, like what were your first, one, two, three kind of objectives that you knew you needed to accomplish to at least start heading in the right direction?
Yeah, there's a great. Well, I'm gonna make this sound overly simplified, right? It was more complicated and like muddy than this, but there's a great Warren Buffett quote. I think it was Warren Buffett, might have been Charlie, but in order to get out of a hole, the first step is to stop digging. And it's not like I knew that quote at the time, but in retrospect, that is what I focused on. I did just like three things. One, and by the way, they were losing money before I got there, right? And then I paid myself. So we had to like just figure out how to pay for Nolan was literally my goal for the first year. How do we increase our revenue enough and decrease our expenses enough to justify me being here? Because there was no role for me. No one like left for me to step in. Um, so first of all, completely naive. Don't recommend necessarily people going into businesses that are losing money where you don't have experience putting your life savings into it, yada yada yada. That is generally not a good thing I would recommend to someone. But it's what I did and how I did it, and I'm glad it's worked out great. But specifically, tactically, what I did is the first thing I did is I went through every single expense and I just saw if I can make it smaller. Do we need to be spending this? And a lot of the times the answer was yes. And that was just great because I just got to know all the vendors and all the expenses. Like, why are we spending that on that phone system? Oh, yeah, no, we do need that phone system. I'm glad we have that phone system. Why are we spending that on rocks? Yeah, we do need to spend that on rocks. Oh, we owe them more money on rocks? Okay, let's pay that. Which credit card is that on? I didn't know we had that credit card. Let's figure that out. A lot of that. Um, but I mean, there was a lot of small wins there. And in some cases, I probably was too tight because I tightened something that gave us actually worse service. I downgraded us on a service that we actually probably needed and we had to re-upgrade later. But there was a couple of pretty significant wins. Most notably, probably was like credit card fee processing. I just renegotiated that and told them I was going to. At that point, there was options, and I just told them I was going to go with another vendor if they didn't lower it, and they lowered it pretty significantly. We probably saved $40,000 that year. So it
Wow.
was like a really big deal. And I was like, oh, cool. I can work for the next 6 months. So there's some of that. And that was the first thing. And then the second thing we did was um, work on just profitability. Um, so I guess the second thing is work on revenue growth, right? So you cut the bleeding, work on revenue growth. And on that, we just had more bandwidth, right? I just naturally think that direction. I'm not necessarily an extraordinarily gifted salesman, but I am more inclined that direction than my business partner. He's more operations. And so that just allowed me to focus on rebuilding the website, rebuilding our customer outreach, increasing dollars per customer. And then the final third piece was making it more profitable, right? Because just more revenue doesn't necessarily mean more profitability that pays for me and the rest of the things. And so specifically, we went through an enormous price adjustment. And that was just hand to hand combat. That was like customer by customer. I had called an investment banker friend and had him help me build Excel formulas that helped me calculate dollar per man hour per client mode. and went through, and I had to make some really heavy changes on some of these people's pricing, some as big as 25, 30, 45%. And
Wow.
we kept a lot of those people. We lost a lot, but I mean, at that point, it's okay to lose a lot of the ones that you're just burning cash on. But we kept way more than we expected. And that pushed us over the edge for like, no one can be here and survive. And we grew, I don't know, 35% that year, and just kept moving. And so those are the very specific tactical things. Stop bleeding, stop digging in the hole, increase the top line, increase profitability. And you have to go through the entire thing to find the big hitters. I wouldn't have known at the beginning that the credit card processing was the thing. I wouldn't have known at the beginning which of the clients needed to be most significantly impacted. It was just a huge project, and then you find the most impactful things along the way.
And so once you right the ship, once you stop the bleeding and you become profitable, let's even say break even, how do you go about thinking about revenue growth or just, you know, increasing your customer base, just growth in general? Because you've grown a lot since then. What's been your strategy? Has it changed over time? Did you start one way and now it's different? Can you walk me through that a little bit?
I'm definitely better than I was, but I think it's do you know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is? Have you ever seen that graph?
No.
So I'll explain it to you. On the left side of the, I don't know if I can verbalize this in a way that someone's listening, but
People
basically
can
you
look it up.
start with yeah, look up Dunning-Kruger effect. It's really a fantastic idea that I completely relate with. But on the left-hand side of the graph, you start with a peak, a very high point, and then it very rapidly declines and then slowly rises again. And so what that signifies here is, from a learning perspective, my first year, I felt really confident I was figuring everything out. By the end of my second year, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. Hilariously, I knew way more my second year, right? So like my competence was greatly increasing, but my confidence was greatly decreasing.
Hmm.
And then sometime my third and fourth year, I started to regain confidence. Maybe even my third year, I started regaining confidence, and competence continued to grow. And so when you ask this question, I'm way better at marketing than I was back in 2017, but I don't know how much more confident I am than I was in 2017. Like 2017, 2018, we were growing in the 30s. 2023, we only grew 10%. And I don't know, I don't think I'm good enough yet to really think I can define exactly why and how that is. I think that I mean, even in the last month, we have done a much better job, last 8 weeks, done a much better job of lining up how we think our marketing strategy is going to go. But I'm not confident I know where the gas pedal is. This is a great lesson. This is a big lesson for anybody that's trying to think about business. I think in large part, I'm just lucky because I chose the right market and the right industry against fairly incompetent competitors. You know, I'm competing against guys in a truck, which is nothing against them, good on them. But I'm just kind of mediocre, which is a lot better than poor when it comes to online marketing. And someday I might actually get pretty damn good at this, which is exciting because there's a long ways for me to still get better. Like I think I keep trying to hit the gas pedal, and I think I'm swinging the air. I think that it's there somewhere. Sometimes I hit it on accident, but I'm throwing money at all the things someone would tell you to, but I'm not certain I'm very good at assessing what the ROI on all that stuff is and how to best allocate it. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, we spent some money on Google Ads and grew a lot, but I'm not certain which dollars were good and which were bad.
Yep. I'm just gonna turn this down for a second. Um, yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's kind of a vulnerable uh statement you just made because, you know, people can look at your I was about to say Instagram profile, but X profile, and they see $8 million business, 85 employees, all that. And a lot of it, a lot of businesses really it comes down to, do you have a good market? Um, is there demand for it? Are you better than your competitors? And a lot of times you don't have to complicate it much more than that. You don't have to have these elaborate marketing plans and things like that. But I will say, when I first started out, kind of in my career in general, my first sales job, I started out in sales. My first sales job was for a construction company, and they did roofing, siding, windows, gutters, like all that. They're
Totally.
a $400 million company, and their primary way of getting clients was door-to-door knocking.
Yep.
And man, is it a brutal industry to start working in, because it just teaches you the hard knocks of life, the rejection, the
No pun
how
intended. Love it.
exact yeah, the just the grind that it really takes to grow a business. That will really certainly serve that to you on a silver platter as you're walking to the next home, knocking on doors. And but it was a very simple process. It was knock on doors, book appointments. They had a call center who called all the leads to confirm appointments. Salesperson would show up to their house and sell a roof or windows or whatever. And their business was, they did
That's
400
it.
million a year, and that's it. Now they probably have Google ads going as well in the background and things like that, but they are not this social media marketing, you know, company or anything. In fact, most people don't even know their name, even where I live, and they're doing these numbers. So, yeah, you kind of answered the question in a really great way, is you don't need to overcomplicate it. You need to offer a great service, be in a good market, and make sure there's demand for your product and be better than your competitors. That's a lot of what it is.
Well, I also think that, I mean, good market kind of implies this, but just size of market is a big deal,
Yeah, right.
right? Like, there's just a lot of grass to cut, and so there's. I mean, I just think about this. I was thinking about this just yesterday, driving back from West Texas or from like a West Texas ranch, just looking at, oh, land clearing would be a fun business to be in, or that right there. Like, I just, that's my brain works, and saw a billboard or whatever. And I was just thinking, like, well, but there's just like $100 million worth of grass to cut just in my area, right? Like, there's just so much to do, and I can just capture a little bit of that, and I've got a really good sized business. Whereas you have to like really be the dominant player in a huge region in some of these other businesses to be able to scale to that size. So I just think it's like another margin of error thing. I can $8 million sounds big or small depending on who you're talking to. Um, that's one of the things from a perspective. By the way, just like my dad's grown businesses way bigger than that, and so my perspective is just that that's not very big, even though most people that would seem pretty large. So it's just not something that I'm like satisfied with at all. It doesn't, that's not true. I am satisfied at this point. This is what God said. You're stopping, then that's fine. But it's not like I have an expectation that I've made it from like a size perspective. But back to what I was saying, choosing an industry where you can be okay at gathering a portion of that industry in that region and still grow to a pretty significant size gives you a lot of wiggle room in learning to be excellent along the way.
Yep. I totally agree. Um, Now, you mentioned that your brain kind of works that way as far as you saw land clearing. Maybe that's a good opportunity. Are you, do you kind of refocus and say, no, look, residential is really what we're going to focus on because there's so much opportunity? Or do you also offer industrial commercial work as well? How do you split that up? Or are you just solely residential right now?
Up until the acquisition, we were solely residential. At the acquisition, about 10% of their clientele was commercial. And so we do have some commercial now as of December. So I don't know, 6 weeks ago at this point, and that has been interesting and fun in some ways and frustrating in others. We're just not set up from a systems perspective to take care of commercial clients. It's a different business. If you want me to get into like how to break down landscaping, we can use that as a case study for cross-pollinating ideas, industries. But it just has functionality that is different. Like and we're not set up for it. And so that's fun from an opportunity perspective, but also frustrating from like I am the sales guy for anything commercial right now, and I haven't usually broken up the time to do that kind of thing and take that phone call and yada yada yada. And so it's just a weird position to be in. We're not we've got it on we do EOS and we've got it on the issues list for upcoming things to just figure out, which is just commercial. Like, do we want to do this? How do we do this? Who's responsible for taking that phone call? How do you bid that? What are we accepting from a size perspective? All that kind of stuff that we've never done before. We just gotta figure it out now.
Yep. Which leads me to some other thoughts. What are what are some recent kind of obstacles, struggles that you've faced as a company, whether it's just operations or anything really, that you've overcome in the recent, let's say, 12 months or so? Does anything kind of pop out to you at all?
I mean, the obvious answer is this acquisition, right? There's a
Okay.
whole bunch of challenges with this thing that we've been going through that we've never experienced before. What I've been saying is anyone that's done a number of acquisitions would tell you that all of my problems are completely normal. But I've never done these acquisitions, so they don't feel normal to me. Like they're freaking hard. They're emotionally taxing, financially burdensome. Um, we spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about the culture is the wrong word, but the process of change and the acronym um, that we use for that is Sarah, shock, anger, resentment, acceptance, hope. And watching these new employees, like that, none of them knew anything until the day we took over.
Wow.
My whole team was completely prepared. Theirs was not at all until the morning of I walked in on their new boss, and that was a crazy experience for me and for them, but mostly for them. Um, and you can just watch that cycle of emotions, and so feeling through that and feeling how do we honor these people and the company they're coming from while also frankly moving fast enough to move like there's a balance between moving slow enough to let them through process that transition but also moving fast enough to rip the band-aid so that we can get through the process, not ignoring the feelings they're having but also challenging them to move through it at an appropriate speed. It's been a huge challenge. And have I done it perfectly? Absolutely not. I can tell you multiple times that I didn't do things well enough, both tactically but also managerial, emotionally, in how I communicated or how I made decisions. But I mean, first time, doing my best, one day at a time.
Yep. I mean, that right there is a lesson learned because, you know, when someone sees I just acquired a company, someone like me is on the outside looking in, it's like, oh wow, like he knows what he's doing. A lot of times people really don't know what the hell they're doing. And you kind of
No.
have to fall on your face and fail forward, um, and kind of tackle things hand-to-hand combat, one to one. And a lot of times you don't know what the outcome's going to be. Does anything like pop into your mind that might be a good lesson for even your followers? Because you got a lot of business people following you too. Anything that just pops into your mind as far as like, hey guys, don't screw up like I did. Avoid this mistake.
Um, I mean, you read any book, or you're going to hear the same stuff about transition. Um, I'll give you three quick ones. One, just can you cannot over communicate. Like it just feels like overkill yourself, but it's just not. Um, Going through situations with people where your new role is going to be this, and they're just completely taken aback. And you're like, I've known this for weeks. Why is this? Oh, I haven't talked to you enough about it. I've talked to your manager, I've talked to people around you, but I haven't talked to you enough. I should just talk to that person more times and more ways and talked about it in this side and then talked about it from this direction so that when that moment came, they'd be more prepared for it. Um, Secondarily, just very tactically, one soft tactics, one hard tactic. Soft tactic is I had this, I actually got just destroyed on Twitter for this. There's a moment where um, they historically had always gotten the week of Christmas paid. Their team did, and our team doesn't. And I mentioned this on Twitter, and all of a sudden I was Scrooge and the Grinch combined, and I mean it was like it got real nasty real fast, and like I had to delete it because it was like going to be a million views pretty fast. Um, but and it got to the point where people were writing bad reviews for our company, which is
Mm,
wonderful. Um, but in retrospect, what could I have done better? And of course, that was frustrating for their team and everything. What I could have done tactically better was understand their team for the most part totally got it. Um, and the reason we couldn't do that, and I'll explain why we couldn't do that, but then what I could have done better from a transition process was we we are very disciplined and rigorous across the board, or try to be, and that's the difference between companies that make 12% profitability versus 3% profitability. Um, they're disciplined on all the edges. They just catch all the little things. And I'm not saying we're even at 12% or more than that, right? We're down the lower end depending on, and so we've got a ways to go. But the of course I want to pay my team more. Of course I want to give everyone the week of Christmas off. Of course I want to give everyone health care. Of course I want to do. But I have a responsibility to all of them to make sure that I have a safety margin financially, literally a margin financially that it secures all of our jobs. And if I don't, then I failed all of them. And so that week, if I had given it off to everybody, including my team, is a $70,000 problem. And so, of course, if you put that on Twitter, you're the rich business guy that wants $70,000 instead of your team having Christmas. But when in reality, it's like, no, their trucks were in horrible shape. And the reason they're in horrible shape is they made business decisions like this and that's too specific, but you get the idea. Is like these are the hard business decisions that have to be made in order to put your team in a position of success and have the money to reinvest for future growth, for more opportunities for your loyal team, yada yada yada, and for yourself and your family. And so I think what I could have tactically done better in that situation was I didn't find out about that policy he had because it wasn't really formally a policy until a couple days before close, and I had so many big things that I still needed to check off that I didn't think enough about it. But of course, I should have recognized that as a huge deal um, right away when he mentioned it, and made a bigger deal out of it and required him probably split the cost of it for his team and had that communicated right up front. So I could have done that better for sure. The third point I'd say is related to the vehicles. I knew they were in bad shape, but they're way worse shape than I expected. And so going through the rigorous and frustrating process of driving every vehicle and taking notes on it over the weekend for the months prior would have been a really good decision and something I should have done. But I just I looked at them all and knew that they were in bad shape, but didn't realize mechanically how difficult it was. So it's just a pain, just go. Everyone views the world in the direction that they want to, and he didn't realize. I sincerely do not believe he realized how bad of shape his trucks were in. I think he viewed them as okay to not very good. And we're looking at them now and we're thinking, oh my gosh, we just bought scrap metal. And so I don't think we're in a bad spot financially. We definitely priced it appropriately, but it is still a lot of work. So
yeah, of course. So you inherited some unexpected problems, which I would suspect that that happens with a lot of acquisitions. You know, I
absolutely.
yeah, I'm not going to name any names here, but I again early in my career worked for a tech company who was very, very popular in the early 2000s. up till maybe 2008, 2009. And when you're a salesperson, which is what I was for a company, the number one thing that matters is, do they have a good product? Do people want to buy the
Yep.
thing that they are selling, right? And that company that I was working for got acquired by a larger company. And I'm sure their accounting department made them look really good. They've been around for 20 years, they've been around for a long time, done a lot of great stuff. But the employees, when we found out that they were being acquired, we were like, oh man, what are they buying? They're buying a horrible product with like, that was the mindset of the employees. And I was one of them because the product just was not good enough to sell. And it was 10 years earlier, but the innovation just was not keeping up with current tech. So same thing. They were probably at the time, probably a $200 million company. And you can imagine that acquisition. And then the acquirer comes in and they're like, oh man, what is going on here?
They didn't drive the trucks. They didn't understand the
Exactly.
product. They should have gotten on a Saturday and done the hard work of driving it around. And they probably got a pretty good deal because they knew the technology wasn't as up to date. And they could probably apply it to their own customer base in a good way, but they still should have driven the trucks.
Right. Right. But even at that level, you would think that there's more due
Yeah.
diligence, but there's always unexpected things. And I think having a subpar product is probably one of the worst things you could inherit because then what do you do? That drives the business essentially. The product or service is really, if you don't have that, what are you selling? Um, so those are huge lessons that you just rattled off, to be honest. I mean, that hit home for me, and I totally understand what you're talking about. So now that you have this new company and you've kind of acquired it, it's part of the overall organization now. What are your goals? Where do you want to take the company? And I'm not just talking about revenue, but um, where do you see the company going now that you've acquired this new one? And like, let's say 3 years, 5 years from now, where do you see the company?
Yeah. 10 years from now, we'll be the largest residential landscaping company in Texas, which is even big. I mean, that again, this is all with the asterisks of God willing. Believe very strongly in I don't remember where it is scripturally, but the passage scripturally that says, "Why do you say tomorrow I'll go over here and do this thing?" You should always say, "God willing, I'll go over there and do this thing because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow." Um, and so, very, very possible that we something terrible happens and we don't have this business at that point. But I don't think so. God willing, we're going to have we got a long way to go, a long runway. We're just now figuring it out. I mean, it's fun to see how much better we are today than we were back then, and frankly, how much better we are today than we were 6 months ago. We're just way better. And so, aspirationally, our entire leadership team's on board and understands that we're going to be the largest in Texas. That means probably 25, 30 million in Austin, and probably within 10 years, we're probably 10 plus in Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, and at least two of the three markets, and maybe somewhere else. So I think we can, God willing, in 10 years, I mean, what does that look like? 4Xing in 10 years? I mean, 30, 40 million, and we can go beyond that. Um, I think obviously there's a lot of things that have to happen before then. I don't think that is that complicated. It's really hard to do, and it requires finding the right operators specifically. That's one of the reasons I like to do podcasts is that someday somebody's going to listen to one of these things and say, "Hey, I'd love to come join you, and I'll come and push the broom for a year to learn how to do it, and then I'll take it to San Antonio for you." And I'll say, "You can come try, and if you're good enough, you can take it to San Antonio, but like you got to come and prove that you're really good at pushing the broom first."
Right.
Um, I don't know why I said broom. We don't really sweep very much, but you got to push a
Leaf blower.
lawnmower.
Yeah.
Um, and just show that you understand our way and you're on board with our core values and you got the aspiration and do it. And big fan of rewarding people that want to do that appropriately. Um, and so, yeah, that's where we're going, and I'm excited about it, and it'll be fun. But it's not going to make me worth anymore as a human. It's not going to make my wife love me anymore. It's not going to make my kids like me anymore. It's not going to make my dad any more proud of me. It's not going to make my brother like me anymore. He'll probably like me a little bit more because he'll make more money because he's invested. But um, I don't, it's not that important from a life perspective, I just think God made me to help young men, other and men in general, uh, become their best selves, and women too. But primary, I mean, God really directed me towards calling truth into men's lives, and I'm going to do that in the context of business and personal development, and sitting around a fire drinking tequila for the rest of my life, God willing.
So you know that your family's not going to love you more. You're not going to be a better person. So what keeps you motivated? Why do you push so hard? What's that fire? Where does that fire come from then?
Um, there's a great quote. What's oh man, I don't remember who in a second here, but um, I'm gonna have to look it up. But essentially, the idea that um, the greatest way of worshiping God is man fully alive, right? And I do believe that I'm generally wired and made, and both from a personal giftings, but also much more from a connections and education and opportunity perspective to do these kinds of things. And like I am obligated to provide the opportunities that I can to the guys around me because I can do this better than just about anybody else can. Again, I'm not saying I'm great. I'm just saying like I grew up in this town. I've been afforded the opportunities to do these kinds of things for better or worse. I got to go do it. And so I'm going to go like I don't it makes me feel sick to not push hard. I just would way rather push than not. That's again, that's not a character thing. That doesn't make me a better human than others. It's just the way I'm wired. And so if I'm wired this way, that's me fully alive. That's how God wired me to be. I've got an obligation to go and provide those opportunities to others and pull them up as well. And so I'm gonna go do it. And it's just really freaking fun. You know, I like to compete. I like to win. And I want to be the best. Not yet. Someday, maybe I'll just go do it. And if I don't, then I'll be the guy that tried and failed and in the arena than the guy that didn't. So
Love that. I mean, I think a lot of people relate to that. And I also think though that there's a lot of people who reach a certain level of success. And I think some people have different threshold than others. But once you reach a certain level of success, you lose that motivation. So, you know, there's always something behind very successful people that keeps them motivated to keep pushing forward, whether it's personal, religious, um, whatever it may be, like competition. But I don't think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I don't think money in the bank is the thing that motivates people who, all right, your level and beyond 20, 30, 50, $100 million a year type of business. Money in the bank, correct me if I'm wrong, can't be the primary driver because once you have everything you need, what else is there to buy? And I think there's a lot of, you know, toxicity on social media in general about, flashy cars, fancy watches, things like that. Um, and you don't seem like that guy at all. Why do you think that is? Why do you have any thoughts on, you get into business to make money, at least a lot of people do. But once you get to a certain level, it's not about the money anymore. So then what is it about? Do you think it's just about those personal things you just listed off? Competition, religion, family, things like that, personal expectations of yourself?
I'm not a good enough communicator to articulate exactly how I view this because there's a whole bunch tied up into it. But um, because my brain just went like four or five different directions.
Pick one
I do
direction.
believe choose one. Um, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have it. Like, I went to a private school. I was around a lot of very successful people. My dad was a rags to riches story. Um, I've seen, I've seen, grew up. I wouldn't say I was ever poor because again, I went to a very nice school, but was I've had a lot of friends that their parents were very, very successful, and I've got a lot of friends now that are very like ridiculously successful. And I just know it doesn't really make you happy. Um, and it doesn't particularly a sign of what I want to define as success. A lot of those people are very, very successful from a financial bank account perspective and also very successful from a family and faith perspective. And so it's not that everyone in that sphere is bad. Like I've been around a lot of extraordinary people on both sides of that. But to, I guess, kind of get at what you're saying is like uh, I am of course motivated by the idea of making more money and um, succeeding from like a stage perspective. But I think that those are generally misguided motivations. I serve a God that is very explicit about these things are not the end goal and are fleeting. And if I believe that on a good day and a good morning that I've had the right amount of coffee and then I exercised and I actually believe it. And then other days I just intellectually know that it's true because he told me it's true. Um, but it's all muddied, right? Like I'm still doing the same actions, but for what motivation? Like I'm still going to go and perform at the highest level I possibly can, whether it is in a response to the guy that's giving me what I have, or it's to gain a fleeting idol. It all looks the same on paper because I'm going to go and execute the best marketing plan and the best sales plan and the best operations plan and the best finance plan out there and just the motivation behind it. And no one knows that except for God and me, and oftentimes not even me. And so all I'm working towards is to try to continue to be excellent and then working on the underlying motivations. And so that's, I guess, another way to look at it is like, how do I communicate this to my kids? What do I want them to see as success in my work? Of course, there's the underlying wrong perspective of I want them to see me as big and successful and in charge of things because I want them to love their daddy for being big and successful in charge of things. But really, that's not, if you were to like actually put me in a chair and say, put a gun to my head, like I would way rather they know I love Jesus and that I want them to love Jesus and go and run a company that's $8 million plus. And I do believe I would actually say that if you put a gun to my head. I hope. I don't know. Don't do it. Don't put a gun to my head. But I think I would. So I don't know. I kind of touched on a couple things there, but I don't know how well I can communicate it.
Well, I think everyone has different motivators. And it's very surprising to me sometimes, or enlightening, I guess, that something that motivates someone doesn't motivate me, and vice versa. Something that demotivates me motivates others. So it's just good to see that, everyone's different. Not everyone is motivated by the same thing. Not everyone wakes up, gets out of bed early in the morning to do something for the same reason. Like not everyone's chasing the same thing. So it's just kind of refreshing to know that, because there's a lot of make money, make money, make money on the internet. And that can motivate you to a certain point. But on a real bad day, an extra dollar in your wallet's probably not going to motivate you. So it's just good to hear that from other people. Slight change of topic. I posted on Twitter, and sorry for my lighting. It looks like I'm kind of in a dungeon at this point, but
All right,
that's all
great.
right. Kind of like a spotlight, like I'm being interrogated here. But I posted on Twitter if anyone has any questions for you. And so I'd love
Please
to
hit
kind
me.
of, yeah, I'd love to kind of end on this
Start
note.
with the most serious one. You know
I
which one I'm talking about.
I will. What was that again? It was
What is my theory on what Taylor Swift is going to do in the new Deadpool movie or something like that?
right. Yeah.
I have no comment. I just think it's the greatest question. We can move on from there. I just thought it was so funny. I think it's probably a bot or something that asked that question, or just
Probably.
some. Nah, he's some dude out there. He's gonna listen to this, and I can't wait for him to know that we talked about him.
That's hilarious. I'm gonna tweet at him after this and let him know that we actually answered his
We did.
questions.
Yeah, yeah, good.
One of the other questions was uh, something that you touched on a little earlier, but I think if we can just touch on it briefly, you're going to be looking to hire operators and kind of higher level people. What are the key factors that you look at in, let's say, kind of that leadership role, that operator's role? Are there any kind of key personality traits or experience that you look for in people? Is it mostly personality traits? Is it mostly experience? How do you approach hiring?
Well, hiring is totally different across the board, right? That for that specific role, that's a very different question than for someone that's going to be driving a lawn crew. I'll answer it for like if I'm looking for someone to start San Antonio, top choice San Antonio. Um, one, character. Um, two, so that's just there's a couple when you talk about core values, there are like buy-in core values. Like you just have to have these things, and we don't even have to talk about them, right? Like character is one of them. We're not there's no conversation past that. The a certain level of intelligence is actually very important. Like you just have to be able to crunch. Like you have to work. You have to have horsepower from an intellectual perspective. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but you have to be able to hang and understand when someone's good or not good at their job and be able to communicate really well around that. So three, EQ. You have to understand humans and how to communicate with them. Four, you have to be a leader, and like I think that that is a really overly processed term. Like leadership should only be defined by followership, like light and darkness, right? Like Hitler was a hell of a leader. He led in bad direction, but he had a lot of people follow him. Like, do you have a track record of other humans wanting to follow you? That could be in chess club. Like you started it and you got a bunch of people to do it with you. It could be on the high school football team. It could be in student government in college. But like, do you have a consistent track record of other humans wanting to do something because you were in charge of it? Because if you don't have that, you're not going to be the kind of person, at least that I want, running a specific branch of our organization because you got to convince people to come and join you over and over and over and stick with you when it sucks because it's going to suck and it's going to be hard to get people to join you. That's just how it is. And then just our company's core values, those aren't necessarily character driven, but our company core values are having an ownership mindset, having a servant mindset. We could better define these, but the third one is just camaraderie. Like there's someone you want to hang out with. I like to say it's like the beer test, like someone you want to have a beer with, but my business partner is a Mormon and he doesn't drink beer, so it's kind of a bad test. But just like someone you, I don't, life's too short to do business with people you don't like. So I don't really want to hang out with someone that's not cool.
That's
That's it.
awesome.
That's just my first take.
That's um that's actually really great. What you last said here, I think, was the punchline of hiring in general. Don't hire people you don't like, even if they're
Yeah.
good at their job. Would you say, or would you disagree with that?
Um, it totally depends. That's a terrible answer, Nolan. Dang it. Um, if someone drags on you emotionally enough that it makes your life at work miserable, then it's not worth it. If it brings like some of your key team members' lives miserable, that's not worth it. But if they're off by themselves and you don't have to deal with them that much and they're just like world class, then you can tolerate them. Then I can see a world in which that's the case. Or if they're like someone that you don't really like, but they're underneath someone else on your team and they don't really bother that person, that's fine, of course. Again, it's not a character thing. I mean, if they're like a wicked person, no, like that's character. But like, if it's just someone that just kind of annoys you, but they don't annoy the other person, then like, of course, it's totally fine. I am flawed. I don't like. I generally like most people. So it doesn't really bother me that much. But
Well, I learned a lot from you today, and I really appreciate you
yeah,
jumping
man, it was
on.
fun talking.
Any final thoughts you'd like to share, or do you think we've said enough?
Mm.
How can people find you?
I'm on Twitter only. I don't do any other social media. Sometimes I post on LinkedIn and then I forget about it and it's kind of weird. Sometimes I'll get back on there. Leadership Acad one, like Leadership Academy, but or just search Nolan Gore. You'd love for you to interact with me there. I spend a decent amount of time trying to write useful things there. I'll make one random plug that I think is important for the world because I care about dudes in general. I just think that most dudes are not committal enough when it comes to relationships, and that you should just get married earlier and just commit and just be okay with it still being hard. Because success in marriage is a long term choice. I've been married for 11 years now, love it. And it still stinks and it's still really hard and it's still very much worth it. So I think we've normalized this non committal thing culturally. And I think it's to the detriment of our society and our kids and the future of America. And I think that is bad. So there's one random plug at the end there that doesn't have anything else to do with what you're talking about.
Hey, I absolutely love that. I don't think that was a plug. That was more of like a life lesson. Cherry on top. That was great. Well, look,
So
thanks for joining. Hopefully, maybe in the future
yeah,
we can do it again in a more professional setting so I don't look like I'm in jail. But this was great. I appreciate you jumping on.
yeah. So thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.